My name is Jonathan Rioux. I'm a managing principal for Artificial Intelligence Department at EPAM Systems. I take my coffee black. I recently got weaned from sugar in my coffee. I no longer like it. To me, the important thing is that it needs to be hot. I cannot do lukewarm or cold coffee.
MLOps Community Podcast is back in action. I'm your host, Demetrios, and talk with Jonathan today. We did not conflate. We did not MLOps and business value. That was one of his key takeaways that I am going to probably be repeating time and time again. Just because you have MLOps doesn't mean your ML projects are going to be successful. In other news, I tend to talk about on this podcast how you don't see fraud detection as a service type companies out there because, it's too hard or the data's too messy or this. I was completely wrong. I just found out today there is a fraud detection as a service company. It is called Qubient. Qubient, maybe, is another pronunciation of it. Stock ticker is KBNT. It was so successful, it IPO'd and everything. It was on the stock market until last year when it got delisted. So, yeah. I was wrong. There we go. Let's get into this conversation with Jonathan. We got to start with this because we were in California 3 months ago, I can't remember exactly when, but we sat down. You guys had a very nice place rented out.
Our man cave.
Yeah, I appreciate you inviting me there. I felt like a VIP. It was the only meeting that I actually took when I was at that conference, and I got treated like royalty. So it was awesome to see you in your element. And you just told me now that you don't think MLOps is sexy. So I have now gone down on the people sexiest man of the year charts, apparently, because I am very attached to the MLOps term. But why don't you think it's sexy?
If I define MLOps as not being sexy, it goes in the same vein as like DevOps not really being sexy or software engineering as a whole not being extremely sexy. I feel like a lot of individuals have coined the term MLOps as kind of a guarantee of revenue or a guarantee of ROI on their ML initiative. It's a different ballgame. If you get to think about it, or at least my definition, I really see MLOps as a set of principle, a set of process, tooling that are all going to work together to facilitate like how quickly you can take an idea and get it to production and maintain it in production without having crashing on you. It does not give you ideas. I mean, I was discussing with a few of my colleagues, a terrible idea implemented using MLOps principle is going to yield a terrible product, but faster and more reliably.
with the DevOps principles in hand, and that is hilarious. So, huge thing you just said there is that do not conflate MLOps with ROI. Just because you have very strong MLOps practices and processes in place, that does not mean that you're going to have a successful ML product or product in general that leverages ML or AI or whatever magic bullet you think is going to save you.
100%. I mean, you're looking into this. I find it absolutely hilarious to see organizations that say, we're MLOps compliant, whatever that means. But then their data scientists, their ML engineers are working in kind of a shared service and becomes that kind of arbitrator of like what is good enough to become an ML product. The way, like a couple of years ago, we were talking around, DevOps for ML before MLOps became kind of bona fide accepted. And to me, it was always about putting business forward people to technology forward people, and in the case of MLOps, analytical and ML forward people to be able to create something. Where did we get lost in the process, saying that, you need a center of excellence that's going to control all of the intake for ML and is going to evaluate it with an arbitrary framework to be able to determine the value, which I think in practice is whoever screams the loudest who gets to own the budget. But I feel like this way we're going further away, from the original piece, which was infuse, embed ML where it makes sense into the product development. And I think it's because a lot of organizations don't really know what to do with ML. So by putting somebody who's accountable on it, I think the natural tendency is to want to centralize everything. It's a little bit the same thing with data organization. If you have a data team who doesn't understand how the data is being produced and who has no control in fixing the source, how can you hope to have data quality? Same principle.
So, bit of a hot take there on organizations don't know what to do with ML. But before we dive down that rabbit hole, you sparked a gigantic thought. I may have my next business idea thanks to you, which is MLOpscertified.com. Just bought that domain while we were on this conversation. Now I am going to go sell that to these businesses and say, you know what you need some MLOps certifications, and I will look at your processes and tell you if they are in line with the best standard practices that we are seeing out there.
Hey, at one point you need to make rent.
Yeah, my daughter needs diapers. That's it. Exactly. So let's go down this rabbit hole of what makes you say that folks do not know what to do with ML?
I think this has been magnified. And I mean, we can talk probably about the two last hype cycle, deep learning a couple of years ago. I actually joined EPAM, my current employer, when at the hype of, I think it was around the time where they were saying like blueberry muffin versus dog using computer vision. Like that was kind of the thing that a lot of people were going around. And now we're having large language model and generative AI. And to me, I think there's a big discomfort because we're back to use case chasing. And a lot of conversation are oriented in the fact of, hey, I have this new technology, where can I apply it? And in my opinion, this stems from a misunderstanding a little bit of the technology, which is totally normal. I think there's a lot of hype in what it can and cannot do. I think people have incentives to be able to, both from a personal standpoint, but also some companies are over advocating the capabilities of generative AI, let's say, in that kind of circumstance. But I think it leaves a lot of business leader kind of flipping the script of, instead of focusing on what they know, which is their business, and seeing what are the problems that can be solved using this technology, and looking at your portfolio from a holistic fashion, we're seeing the opposite, where people are starting with the technology which they understand partially, and then trying really, really hard to think about compelling business problem, or even worse in certain cases, like, oh, what kind of white space innovation we can do, where the biggest benefit that we see companies that, I mean, our company, as an example, like our biggest usage of generative AI is firmly in the gray space innovation. Like, what are the process that are cumbersome? What are the process that are tedious, repetitive, that we can kind of do micro optimization, if you allow me to like blend two words together. But for us, it was always evident. If you're in control of the roadmap and the problem that you have, and you have a good grasp on what are your opportunity for improvements, you don't really need to go into that all-out panic. And you add on top of that, adding a generative AI center of excellence, which means that your data scientists who already have permeated the industry now are kind of working double shift, because, you have your regular job where you're part of a product. You may follow MLOps process. Some companies are lucky enough to be able to have data scientists that are horizontally laid out. And then you have that center of excellence, which means that you're uprooting how your company is working just to be able to adopt that technology. So I think a lot of companies are not AI ready, and a lot of companies that were, a little bit more AI mature, Gen AI is kind of disrupting them, but not because the technology is so promising and wonderful. It is promising and wonderful, but because I think the natural reaction is to centralize, to control, to limit, and ultimately it sets you back.
So basically, it's like you're saying folks are taking their eye off of the ball, and instead of spending time and energy and cycles in what they know best, which is product or just their business line and what the business is actually focused on, now they're thinking, oh, this AI stuff is so cool. What if we put it into here? And what if we put it into there? And mind you, nobody's actually asking for that. Nobody's thinking, you know what I would love? A chatbot that actually responds to me when I pop up onto your website. Stuff like that. It's not that they are going from those principles of what does the customer want, and then is AI the best way of solving it? It's more thinking, we've got AI now, we might as well use it. And especially if you're in another one, this might be my ultimate dream job. I want the title of AI Center of Excellence at some company. That sounds like an incredible job. I will be Chief AI Center of Excellence if you anoint me that title. Sounds like the most bullshit job ever, but I digress. So anyway, if that is my title, I am going to, of course, champion for all these different use cases of how we need to infuse AI into all these processes, right? Because it's in my best interest.
Yeah, but then you get into the very real problem of you're ultimately centralizing all of that innovation for an entire company, which means that you need to acquire more than a working knowledge on every business function that is coming to you with use case, because otherwise it's very difficult for you to understand, appreciate, and empathize with the value that this can bring. There's also a tremendous amount, and this is something that we see quite a bit, is separating, optimization versus potential revenue generation, calibrating some of the risks that you can have. So there is a place for deeper knowledge on what is the application of generative AI, and having a little bit of a more technical bias. But this is done in conjunction with your business functions, and you can't remove them, the agency. You can't prevent them from innovating. Otherwise, we talk a lot about shadow IT, but we're seeing a lot of like shadow AI, shadow Gen AI. And to me, this becomes that is step one in, having a very unfortunate thing that's going to happen. We're seeing a ton of use case that, public chatbots that are making promises where they were not supposed to make promises, data leak, those kind of thing. And I think it is related. I'm not involved in those things. I like to think that, I keep a tidier ship than this. But I think it's easy to explain. Is you're in a business function, you really want to be able to launch something. There's someone somewhere else in a company that's saying this is not really a priority. You're looking at this as an opportunity to out-innovate the innovation lab. You go forward.
Yeah. And then you sell cars for $1.
you sell cars for $1, or in Canada we had Air Canada promising
Another one.
refunds where there were no refunds that were supposed to be done, and we're seeing a lot of funny things. I mean, internally we experiment quite a bit with like some patterns that we hear. We test a lot of LLM. We have some pretty funny stories. We definitely dog food a lot of what we're like, try to come in front of a client and have a compelling point of view. So I failed a lot with LLM, but usually behind closed doors.
Yeah, so you protect your ass. That's a smart way of doing it. Just yesterday, I read about how Slack rolled out their AI feature, and they didn't realize it, but you can prompt inject it so that it gives information from private channels into the answers of any questions that are asked to the Slack AI. So it's like, there's stuff that are in those private channels that may want to be kept private. And this is Slack. Like, we've had really great engineers and data scientists on this podcast from Slack. They're incredible.
Yeah.
And they're still not able to fully think about all the different repercussions that this can have when it comes out.
And I think we're going full circle on that frame. Is, to me, this is a gap in your let's call it LLMOps pipeline, because I see this as building a tower. You have your DevOps practices, your version control, good coding hygiene. Are you using, extension that can augment your productivity, and so on and so forth, like personal development, but also team management. You have your data ops, which is where, data as a product, what can be used when, clear governance. There's still a lot to explore there. I think that we're doing a pretty bad job at weaponizing data properly. We move to MLOps, which is your entire life cycle, model management, but also your entire lineage, making sure that you can have reproducible builds when a model is put in place, and then you go with LLMOps. But you get to think about it, like, to me, a data leakage. I don't know exactly how they've architected the product, but somewhere at some point there's an access control that is failing, and I'm not saying that it's easy, and they're under a tremendous amount of pressure, but it becomes like it's easy to understand, at least conceptually, where it failed, and it's a good reminder that even the strongest company, the company that employs the best engineer and that has the most budget, is not immune to those lapses in their process.
So you mentioned how centralizing things with this center of excellence is not the ideal scenario, because the center of excellence now has to understand on a deep level each aspect of the business, almost more than the actual people that are doing that, because they have to understand what AI is capable of and where the rub is for the accountants or for the salespeople or whatever it may be. How do you recommend going about it so that it isn't centralized, but it's also successful?
I mean, I like to use the expression, like, are you a left-leaning data scientist or a right-leaning data scientist? So, like, are you looking into, you want to be able to centralize by competence, which means a little bit what we've mentioned. And I think we see that it does not work in practice. But I also think that the complete opposite, which means each business function is responsible for the entire data, ML, LLM stack, it is also out of reach for most organizations. You can't have, one data scientist or a series of data scientists across multiple functions, and it becomes really hard to encode best practices, and you end up with, you have a ton of data scientists all around the organization. The governance become difficult. Dissemination of best practices becomes hard. This is where you get, we're seeing sometime, 10 different environment with a different set of governance. It's really, really tough to control your enterprise risk on that front. So to me right now, like in August of 2024, or I think September of 2024, when this is going to go live, I think that the best model that we can have is some sort of hub and spoke, where but a little bit of a different approach, where you're not seeing the center of excellence as a governing function, but more of a support function. And I think that's what's hard for a lot of people, because they see the center of excellence as a way to augment their profile, but you're really supporting, you're making sure that everybody has the tool that they have, a little bit kind of a proverbial scrum master. Your job is to facilitate and make it easy to do the right thing. So I think right now this would be the model that I have a tendency to recommend. We do have a tendency to go in between, like as LLMs going to become more commoditized, easier to understand, more permeated into the industry. I think that we're going to go more and more decentralized, and then something else going to come in, and you're going to see a huge shrinking that, we have a huge skill gap. We don't have a lot of people that understand this. We're going to create a center of excellence that's going to govern whatever new hype cycle is going to come. And we're just going to repeat that process again and again.
Again, anybody out there that's hiring for center of excellence chief, I'm your guy. So that is exactly, that hub and spoke model is exactly what I think Uber did. When I was reading their blog post on how they've evolved Michelangelo, which is arguably one of the most famous ML/AI platforms out there, they said that, and they mentioned how you have very experienced and advanced folks that are kind of pulling features or needs or capabilities out of the platform. And what they had to do is recognize what use cases they were trying to create with these feature requests and see how much money that was making for the business. And one thing that I thought was fascinating, and I repeat this quite a bit, is how they were able to figure out which models, which use cases were generating what kind of ROI for the company. And so they had different tiers of babysitting, we could say, for different models. And you see that, and it kind of is what you were saying, because they have the Michelangelo platform and it helps support 99% of the use cases. But if there are people that want to do their own thing, they can. And Michelangelo just tries to make it as easy as possible for those people to then, when they're done doing whatever it is they're doing, they can bring it into the fold and run it on Michelangelo.
I love that example, because to me this exemplifies perfectly that support model that we're trying to get. I mean, we're even looking at this, and Uber is an example of a very advanced company, but I think a lot of individuals are working, whether it is banks, insurance company, pharmaceutical, publishing. They probably don't have the VC funding that to invest, or nor should they. Like I think we have to acknowledge that Uber made a very risky bet in creating their bespoke architecture, and they were one of the first to do so and to be very public about it. I think the market is catching up. I mean, Uber has open sourced significant portion of their tooling. There's other players in the market. But I think you have to think of it as the jobs to be done. So what what are the process that you want people to follow? Where are your source of truth? And the way that we look at this, we talk a lot about MLOps around people, process, platform, and I think a lot of people are just throwing this around, but people follow process and the platform enables those process. But at the end of the day, you can have the best platform in the world, you can have the best people in the world, but if there's no clear way of doing things, or as you said, when you need to go off script, how do you plug in and plug out of that process and identify those 95 to 99% activities? Like everyone's going to need to host a model. How do we make it as simple as possible? What is, the SLA that we need to provide? Do we want to create this in-house, deploy our own model on Kubernetes? What's going to be the skill gap? A lot of people are going and they're saying, we don't want to pay for, either a third-party tool or, hosting is very expensive, so we're going to try to do it ourselves. Well, you have to acknowledge that if your team of data scientists are not, cloud competent, it's going to be difficult for them to go, and they will be frustrated because as long as it's going to work, it's going to be wonderful. But the day that you're going to have to troubleshoot something and the abstraction's going to fall, you also need to be mindful that everything's good as long as it works. But I talk from experience. Like my previous organization, we made the choice of deploying our models on EKS, and it was wonderful. It was really fun. I mean, it's very gratifying to be able to deploy. We got some problem where our scaling was not working properly. It was very interesting and fulfilling, like intellectually, to be able to learn about this. But ultimately, I look at this from an OKR perspective. I was unable to work on any other thing. My team was 100% mobilized to be able to fix this, which basically means a month later, there's nothing new, no model refresh, no nothing kind of coming into place. So it's all a question of checks and balances. And I like to use and remind everyone of what needs to be done, make it as easy as possible, make it as friendly as possible. And if people want to be able to go off script, at least they have a set of convention that it can hinge into.
God, just talking about that reminds me of a conversation I was having with my buddy last week. And it was a little bit about how you have these companies that are spun out of the quote unquote top tier companies, like the Ubers or the LinkedIns or the Googles or Facebooks, Meta, all of that. The engineers at these companies say, oh, wow, I have this problem. And they create some open source product, and then it gets a bit of traction, and boom, the playbook. They go raise a bunch of VC funding and it's off to the races. And my buddy was saying, man, but what a lot of these folks don't understand is that not everybody is a top tier engineer. So they've built this product for their friends at the company that they used to work at, knowing the skill level that they were at. And they're not building it for me. Like, I am not that type of engineer. And I'm being very candid about it. I'm not going to be working at Uber in their engineering department anytime soon, or Meta's engineering department, except these products are built like I should know how to work it, and I should know how things need to function. And it's like you're saying, like, if you can just bring it down a few notches, dumb it down for me, that would be incredible, because you're going to have much more success. It's going to be mass market, and you're going to have people that love your product because of that user experience.
I totally agree with you. I think it's also like, I want to excuse a little bit the behavior of those folks, because I also think that it's just very natural. Like, I think anybody who's been working in the space for a long period of time, especially surrounded by their peers, sometimes there's kind of a big dichotomy. Like on one part, you're looking around and you're like, man, we're so late and everything. But also, and I'm 100% guilty of this. We have an overwhelming tendency to assume that everybody knows as much on the topic we love as ourselves. So, I mean, I'll use kind of very funny anecdote, but we had some interns this summer and very eager to learn and very excited, and they've done a lot of data science, Jupyter Notebook kind of analysis. And then we get them, kind of set up into the environment. And me and my team, at least for personal project, like we have a pretty old school stack. Like I'm still a big fan of make files with all of its warts. I just feel like, it's kind of a good thing that you can hinge ourselves onto. And they were all like, if you're talking about one of the lowlights of their internship was like figure out all of those tools, version control, CI/CD, make files, automation. They were just like, it's so much to take all at once.
The first month. Just the ramping
so,
up.
But to me, I was like, oh, well, I've learned this. Like, anybody can learn it, but you get to think about that. Like, I'm happy to go on the record that it took me, a couple of years to be able to adopt version control properly, and then to be able to understand CI/CD in a way that works for me, like not necessarily all of the intricacy. It took me, a little bit of time afterwards. So my expectations of adoption are like, oh yeah, man, that should be enough. It's not. Like you're trying to change habits, and it's one of the challenge. I do a lot of MLOps consulting, and implementing the stack, suggesting a process map, doing an analysis of like what is versus what should be, doesn't take a lot of time. There's good internalized practices that you can go. We take pride in nuancing a little bit. Like not everybody, I'm not going to go and sell the same product to everyone. Not everybody is in the same boat. But the change management and getting data scientists to adopt tooling, and we have a lot of conversation downstream where we do a check-in and they're like, well, they're like, I don't understand, like CI/CD is not everybody's using it, and it's like it's going to take time. People need to. I almost feel like you need to be frustrated enough with the current state so that you can adopt the change. But ultimately everything, from you decide as a company to become more agile, to put some automation, to streamline your process, this is going to cascade into individual team, how they're going to adopt this. And then it's going to go to individual developer. And that process is like, it can take months, years, depending on how far you're going. And I don't think we appreciate it. Like, you and I, we did all of this. So now it's kind of like everybody should do it.
Exactly. So great points. All right, real quick question for you. Are you a Microsoft Fabric user? Well, if you are in luck, because we are introducing SAS Decision Builder. It's a decision intelligence solution that is so good, it makes your models useful. Because let's face it, your data means nothing unless you use it to drive business outcomes. It's something we say time and time again on this very show. But wait, what do you mean by nothing? Well, SAS Decision Builder integrates seamlessly with Microsoft Fabric to create effortless business intelligent flows. It's like having a team of geniuses you manage in your pocket without all that awkward small talk. With Decision Builder, you'll turn data into insights faster than brewing a double espresso. And you know how much we like coffee on this show. Visually construct decision strategies, align your business, and call external language models. Leverage Decision Builder to intuitively flex your data models and other capabilities at breakneck speeds. There's use cases for every industry, including finance, retail, education, and customer service. So stop making decisions in the dark. Turn the lights on with SAS Decision Builder. Yes, I did just make that joke. Watch your business shine. SAS Decision Builder, because your business deserves better than guesswork. Want to be one of the first to experience the future of decisions? Well, sign up now for our exclusive preview. Visit sas.com/fabric or click the link below. Let's change gears for a minute. I want to talk about this idea that we touched on where you mentioned how you're doing all kinds of POCs with folks in the Gen AI sphere. And all of a sudden, 6 months later, you got that POC up and running and people are coming back to you saying, okay, so now what's the ROI on this? And you're looking around like, wait a minute. We weren't talking about ROI. We were just trying to get something up and running. Can you explain that a little bit more? Put a little more color on that.
Oh, for sure. So maybe like we can contextualize a little bit like the situation. You're an enterprise, and I mean, this could be my company. This could be any companies that we do work with. One of their primary goal is to get familiar with the technology. So they're selecting use cases, they're prioritizing use cases, and as part of the prioritization, no talk or very little of what's going to be the return on investment. And I'll use the example of the HR chatbot because I think it was identified for a lot of company as it's kind of the Goldilocks use case. You know, the data is well understood because everyone is at least has a high level of familiarity over what HR is, the type of questions that you can ask, the type of answers that you can expect. Not saying it's a very easy use case. There's a lot of finesse into it. But conceptually, everybody can understand it. Your data's captive. You don't need to do third-party data acquisition. You don't even need to understand your data landscape. You know, every company has an HR function. Everybody takes vacation. Everybody gets paid. Like it almost kind of perfect on that front. But it's one of those automation use case. So the real question that you have to ask yourself is, if you want to turn out an ROI, is are you going to be able to limit your hiring? Is it going to, relieve people from doing more productive work, more revenue generating work? And it's not a use case that's going to drive. I don't think for most organization an HR chatbot is going to drive a tremendous amount of return on investment, because on top of it, one of the prerequisites to be able to have that is to have your documents very well organized, very well structured, which is kind of a big important of the work. And by the time you're done with this, then an FAQ becomes a very easy thing to implement. So you do it, you implement it, you do the POC, you get it. The costs are very real because, you're calling the API, you have your application, you can have a cloud bill, or, the salary of people that are coming into, usually it's going to be let's say a team of 4 people for a number of weeks, and then you keep 1 or 2 people to be able to maintain it and continue updating the knowledge base, and those jobs might be part-time. So you're engaging the cost, and then you're going to be asking yourself, okay, what's going to be the return on investment? And we see a lot of people whose their usage statistics are not super great. A lot of people don't want to use the chatbot, or the answers are not super relevant. We've seen people have chatbots getting confused by the country that you're in because you don't necessarily have the context, so on and so forth. But then they're like, okay, so what's the return on investment? And you have to acknowledge that the true return on investment that you had is, well, you undertook, doing your vendor selection for the technology that you want. You got a preferred Gen AI vendor. You internalize some of the design pattern. You got to see some of the failure mode from Gen AI. There's a lot of endemic knowledge that kind of got into it. You're better positioned to be able to prioritize those use cases. But somehow all of that learning, nobody cares about it. Everybody is like, okay, how do we turn an ROI on this specific initiative? And I feel like it's a little hypocritical to do that, because and I understand where it comes from, but ultimately, you have to acknowledge that you took that use case because you wanted to get familiar with the technology. You need to keep this as part of your narrative, because it is probably like 90% of the reason why you picked that use case. Otherwise, if you really wanted to have something that drive return on investment, you have to do this at the inception. You have to do this as your prioritizing initiative. And especially a POC is meant to prove return on investment. So you're validating, like, to me, the concept that you're trying to validate is, if I use an LLM for this business process, is it going to work? We've seen occurrences where you don't have access to the data, you don't have a complete picture, you're looking at automating the process, but you need to insert the human into the process at very awkward places, which basically means that attempting to automate the process makes it slower and more cumbersome. That's what you want to validate. So to me, it comes a little bit as a weird positioning. We're seeing less of this now. I know we talked about this a couple of months ago. I think organizations are getting a little bit better at this, and we see some of the organizations that we do work with are actually quite unapologetic around selecting use case and identifying revenue. And what they have in common is their business people took a very keen interest in getting familiar with the technology, understanding not necessarily like, the intricacies of it, but they have a good mental model of how it works. And there's a very tight collaboration in creating those products. And we're seeing more and more of this. I find this very encouraging.
Do you feel like those learnings that you talked about in the POCs, they can be salvaged, and almost like you pull a rabbit out of the hat and you say, hey, the HR chatbot is shit. We all know that.
Mm-hmm.
But now that we've got all this stuff, we actually have an idea for something that will bring ROI. Does that give people pause? Because now they're thinking, this again, we got to go through that whole cycle. Even though it's going to be a bit more streamlined,
Mm-hmm.
there still isn't that kind of buy-in as there was before.
I think it depends on like what's your appetite to invest, and ultimately how the market is responding to those claims. Like I think it's important to remember that it's very exciting to pursue generative AI, and I mean the market, like for a lot of public company, the market has rewarded companies that have been very vocal about adopting Gen AI. So what do you do with that power? I think is the broader question that you need to ask yourself. Some companies are, a little bit burned because, they don't really have that risk, like that notion of risk that it's not guaranteed. You're putting a hypothesis, and on top of that, some people are not stopping their POC early enough. I'm seeing sometimes people doing a proof of concept and they're engaging full UI, complete build. They want to be able to do user testing, and
Sounds expensive.
It is expensive. If you're very confident that your backbone, that like there's going to be a fit and it's going to be used, and you have a good notion of where it's going to go, I think it's fine. Like there's no one size fit all. But I would postulate that a lot of company could use in reducing their POCs and trying to distill them down to a series, like one, maybe up to 3 questions that you're trying to validate. And one of the things that we're implementing on a lot of the POCs that we do is we start with a scorecard. So, you want to do, I'll use a very common example that we see, but you have a ton of unstructured data that is coming, fax, emails, PDF, and you want to extract, relevant information on it. I think at this stage, the POC has been validated. I think industry-wide, we understand it's a very good use case for generative AI. Is it going to work with your document? Well, boiling down to a very simple question, work on the ML portion, use those results to be able to build a business case. You don't necessarily have to engage, a massive team for a long amount of time. You're proving a concept. If you want to go straight into a pilot, we're seeing a lot more of that happening because, the concept's been proven. And then you can start asking questions that are going to come onto it. But to me, this has very little to do with how you do data science as an organization. It's very much how do you develop internal product or even external product, and how do you innovate as an organization?
Yeah, I was thinking that same thing. It's more about how do you run a proper POC. If it's in Gen AI, great. If it's in some other random aspect of the business, great. You still got to know how to properly conduct these POCs.
Yeah.
There's another thing too that, as I was thinking, it almost is, I don't know if it's counterintuitive, but it is like going back to what we were saying earlier on, your job is the center of excellence, and you now have to validate those POCs, and you have to figure out where is the ROI. It makes for potentially sticky conversations. And so, like you were saying, you're coming in more in the line of, there are certain use cases that have been proven. We've had ChatGPT for almost 2 years now, right? And so it's pretty clear that it works really well with these 5 things. Choose one of these 5 things, and you'll probably be able to see some ROI from it. If you go down this route, it's cool, it's fun, you'll learn stuff, but ROI, don't bring that into the conversation.
Well, I mean, we're a consulting organization, so we've created a series of like handy dandy tools for those kind of endeavors. It's funny that you say those 5 things. We actually have I use that mental model a lot of time, like the 5 pillars of Gen AI. Like what are the verbs that generative AI is very good at? It's like, kind of summarize, synthesize. Like it gives. I think it's a great way to do outreach, with people that are closer to business function, and it also helping them build a healthier mental model of the technology, whether it is, and I mean, generative AI is what's going to be the tip of the spear, but, traditional machine learning or deep learning or even plain old automation has also a place, and usually they work together. Like, you have a lot of compound system. A lot of people talk about, LLM agents, which I prefer to see it as that synergy between software, ML, deep learning, and generative AI. But by doing that outreach and continuing to maintain those relationships within your organization, you're in a much better position to be able to identify use case and do back of the envelope POC. But one of the things that we do quite a bit is, hey, one afternoon we're going to validate this, a handful of document, like, see, this is a result. This is what's good. This is what's bad. Are we in a stage where we feel pretty comfortable? And then as you design, your flow, like what you're trying to optimize or what you're trying to develop, understanding what are the different failure modes. I think that this is a very exciting way to me to develop new products and to be able to generate what I would say, like differentiating a product. Like once in a while we see a couple of companies, and most of the time it's not a company that you would expect, but they naturally, like a couple of people are going to converge, they're going to hack on an idea, and you're just going to be like, wait a moment, that's really smart.
What have been some of those that you've seen that surprised you?
I would say, to me, it's something that we've seen very recently, was to how do you create a chatbot, let's say, with content that is not that needs to be curated, like in the sense of your hallucination tolerance is 0, like none whatsoever. So it's kind of a tough predicament to say we're just going to put an LLM. No amount of prompt engineering, RAG, fine-tuning, anything is going to make up for the fact that ultimately you will get inconsistency. So one of the things that we've developed as a blueprint, which came from numerous conversations that we had across the industry, was to, well, what if we didn't use an LLM for that stage? What if we just use a mere classifier, present the information in a way that you're not compromising? Like, you ask a question, you do, a classifier to like, what is a question that is closely related, and present that. And if there's a little bit of inconsistency, that's just become part of your knowledge loop. But then use the large language model, the LLM loop, in the content creation, curation, and review to streamline the work, which is mandatory work. At one point, someone needs to create the content that's going to be served. How can we accelerate it? So we ended up creating a bona fide workbench for optimizing the creation of that content, the ingestion of the relevant material to be able to create, going even to a point, you ingest a PDF, this is the style of questions that we know people are going to ask. What type of question does this document answer? And we're seeing the same benefit. You have the chatbot is presenting the information that it's supposed to. The chatbot is not hallucinating. There's nothing sexy there. Like, it's something that you use previous generation technology. But we look at the process, see where the friction was, and ultimately it was in the content creation and curation. And because this is something that the human is very tightly in the loop, LLM can play in that arena. And to me, it was one of the things that, like, at first when I was looking at this, I was a little bit puzzled, because I was like, this looks overly complicated. But then you start decomposing, like, what are the non-negotiable? And then you're like, well, traditionally you would say like, you can't have any hallucination. Oh, well, so LLM is not a good use case. We're going to go to the next. Oh, wait a moment. This is actually something that is very valuable. A lot of content is a big pain in the ass for a lot of people. Can we pay attention to it? And then it was, in our case, we had some subject matter experts, some people that are creating the content, a team of data scientists to be able to develop the model, and it works. I was legitimately surprised it works.
Wait, so I wasn't clear. There was no LLM involved, or it's just involved later on? It's
involved
stages?
Ahead of time. It's like you're basically, you're like, you have kind of a knowledge base, and you're doing, you're using natural language understanding to be able to match the question that is proper. But when you're creating those articles and the metadata that makes them referenceable, you use large language model to generate,
like the embeddings. When you're creating the embeddings, you have your embedding model, and so you're using the embedding model still.
It's kind of a reverse RAG. Like,
you just created a whole new type of RAG. Get out of here. So now, hold on.
We've
got graph RAG, we've got advanced RAG, we've got naive RAG, and you heard it here first. We now have reverse RAG.
I will take absolutely no credit for this. I do not want to. There's something that a lot of people say, like it's been unvented. Like it just happened to be the pattern at hand. I don't want to be. I don't want to go and create a paper on reverse RAG, and I'm going to get shredded on LinkedIn.
Oh, this is how I'm going to go and get my Center of Excellence job. I'm going to go write that paper on reverse RAG. I'm going to coin the term.
I can imagine this in your MLOps certification thing. You've never heard of reverse RAG, and then people start searching and they see your name as the primary author. Like self-service at its finest.
LinkedIn top voice. That's what I'm going for, baby. All right. So you reverse RAG'd it, basically, which means and there's a classification model. I'm still not completely sure how this works out, but it sounds really cool because anytime anyone says these magic words to me, my brain and my attention perks up, which is we decided not to use an LLM. When you say that to me in 2024, I go, wait, what?
Yeah.
That is unconventional. And so you're using a classification model, but I am not. So you're using the embedding model still.
So I'll give you an example. Let's say for instance that you're working for an insurance company and you want to be able to have some information around your policy. You're going to ask her questions around like, what is my deductible if I have sewer backup? There's actually like, you don't need an LLM in order to be able to serve that information. There's a couple of classification that you're going to have to do where, you live in, state X, you're in this city, this is your policy, you're going to have to extract all of that information, which for the most part is structured. Like you don't need to start stuffing some embeddings and creating a massive RAG of all the policies and so on and so forth.
Because it's in the CRM.
Exactly.
So you have that information about the customer. Yeah. And this is basically a customer support question. Insurance can't be telling you policies that are not your actual policy, so it can't go wrong.
Exactly.
That's why you're paying, like,
and then the article, like, as a matter of fact, your insurance policy was written with a set of articles. So you can just say, you're going to take this article that's going to be attached to your policy, that's going to be attached to who you are, and then you can craft that answer. So in that case, you just resurface the piece of content that you want, and you can just add like some deterministic fluff of like, hey, Dimitrios, like based on this information that we have with you, this is what's written in your policy. If you have more questions, you can ask more questions, and then you can escalate with it to a human. But serving that initial piece of content, there's absolutely nothing stochastic, with the exception of taking your question and translating it to the appropriate article. But if you use an LLM, there is a chance like that
is whatever
it might reshuffle something. And we're not talking like, in that case, we're not talking to people that are like, I would rather eliminate hallucination. We're talking around people that are either scared shitless or they're constrained either by the government or, by, they're afraid to get sued if they get some bad information. Think of it for a moment. Companies that are trying to do chatbot for drug usage, where when you get information, like it's really easy for this to get out of hand. Like, let's discount the legal framework for a moment. If you ask questions around like interaction between two medication and the LLM, for some reason, there's something that magically escape, you could be in trouble. So how do you redesign this and find alternative pattern? And it's not just data science, it's how you're going to present the information, We did a lot of analysis, like human-centered design, UX development, to be able to see how it is going to go. A lot of experimentation internally, because it's a problem that we decided was worth pursuing. It's a pattern that we're seeing across multiple customers, and it's an interesting problem. And I think that taking that approach also demystifies that all or nothing approach to, like, either you put LLM at the center of everything or you go home. There's a lot of things that you can do with a more nuanced and thoughtful approach.
Wait, so isn't this just basically what we were doing in 2017 with Chatbot?
Yeah, but not every company is either was ready for that, or for a lot of company, generating the content was tedious. So and this is one of the place where, in that case, in the content generation or the content curation or collection, or in that case, like we've done some work with a client where we've used large language model to generate the questions that could be answered by that document, and do Q&A pairs, which is a lot easier for someone to review than have to generate it themselves. So it becomes more of a productivity play rather than delight your user with an approximate chatbot.
I see. Yeah. And this is fascinating to me, because I know a few companies that are actually trying to do this as a service. And so I think it is one of those things that is immensely valuable as a use case. If you can, the support team at any company that has a large volume of customers is just inundated constantly. And we know that because if you've ever tried to call or get somebody on the phone of whatever, your phone provider or your local whatever, you know that it's a pain in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can lift a little bit of that burden, it's really helpful. What I always have trouble with is, a lot of times there are questions, but then there are other times where I need something done. I need to talk to you because I need something to happen. And so it's almost like I am very skeptical that I'm going to be able to get a machine or a support bot to actually do those things in a way that I can trust that thing to happen.
I mean, it's also kind of the dirty secret of a lot of, like, agent workflow. We, like, a lot of people use the verb, like, function calling, for an LLM to be able to perform an action. The function need to exist. Like, I find it funny to say this, and I know, like, I'm I saw your smile when I started, but if there's nothing to call, then everything fall like a house of cards. So you need to build that kind of tower. Like, let's say, use an example, like, I want to close my account. Then you talk to a chatbot because you're going to your bank. Well, there's a pretty big SOP that like standard operating procedure that needs to be followed. Sometimes people are going to try to retain you. So it actually, like, if you look at this, it usually looks like a decision tree with, like, inflection point and decision making that you have to do. But let's say, for an example, that, like, the action close the account involves 3 applications, 4 screens, and then a letter that you have to mail to the person. Cool. Your very first step should be to automate that, and then you can start growing your process, and maybe the agentic LLM is going to be your North Star. But start with those fundamental, gain the ROI as it's going to go. What are the things that, because you're not necessarily going to want to the LLM to call 4 function one after the other. If that step happen, you might want to, do something that's going to abstract it. you might still be working with like an AS400 type system, which means that you're going to do RPA or, God forbid, put an LLM to interpret the screen and then click on those things. And
then, there we go.
Yeah, but I mean, it all has to do with your system design, and an LLM application is also an ML application, which means that all of the consideration that you have with ML also applies to your LLM app, and all of that is also a software product. So you have to remember that all of the responsibility of developing a software product, nothing disappears because you ignore it, but it also gives you that complete array of tool that you can leverage. And a lot of things need to happen sometime before you can use an LLM competently. And a lot of companies are, I think we're seeing this right now, where everybody's doing agent-based LLM, and they're all doing LLM hosting, and they're all doing LLM development into the ecosystem, because it's new, it's interesting, it's fresh. But you also need to remember that's just part of the story. Like, what are you going to do with the rest of the stuff? You want to be able to do a RAG and you need embeddings. Cool. But if your data is on a OneDrive somewhere and, it's getting updated by, Penny from finance every Tuesday, well, you need to be able to have a pipeline that's going to do this. It's not Gen AI, but it needs to happen still.
It's funny because in 2020, we had Luigi Petruno on this podcast, and I wrote a post after talking with him because one of the main themes that I took away from the conversation was start manual first and then automate.
Yeah.
And you just added an extra little bit to it. It's start manual first, then automate, then AIify, or then make it AI agentable, whatever it may be that the next step is. So if you want to function call it or make it agentic, it's almost like that. Manual, automate, agentic.
Yeah.
And you can't just jump over any of those steps because your agent is going to not be efficient. And I really like how you said that. It's probably not the most useful for the agent to have 4 different function calls in there. Maybe you can abstract something and make it a lot easier for the agent when it comes time for you to make it agentic.
And as you design your experience, you have to remember that even though it's an LLM, like it depends on how much control you want to give to the machine. Like if you're one of my favorite thing, like sometimes we do design of customer service bots or internal productivity bots, and you ask, okay, what should happen at this point? And everyone around the room, it's like, well, it depends. And it's like, cool, we're going to have to break that down because ultimately you're relinquishing your decision-making to either an open source LLM or a third-party LLM. And you also need to be able to design fail-safe. And this is very similar to how you design for human. Humans' errors are creeping in. How do you correct them? There's a lot of process that needs a second person to go over it because it's highly sensitive. So you have to design those workflow, and I think we're getting the grasp of it. One of the things that I use a lot is every single time there's a decision point that you want to use machine learning and you want to use generative AI. I'm always saying the question, like, let's assume that 70% of the time it's going to do the right thing, but 30% of the time it's going to do something wrong. Is this making or breaking your use case? And I've had some occurrences where people were like, well, we need 100% accuracy. Still to this day, it was the same thing when we were talking about like linear regression, tree-based models, even neural network, and now with LLM, your definition of, okay, how many errors are you willing to accept? If your number is 0,
probably not the right use case.
Probably not the right use case, but also, are you really that certain that the humans that are doing the job are also making 0 mistakes?
Turn the tables. Yeah. Totally. Because anybody who answers that honestly is going to go, yeah, of course, we're making mistakes all the time.